In 2018, Sony Animation Studios released Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. I remember seeing the first trailers and had a cautious optimism because Sony Animations hasn't had the most stellar of repertoires. The animation and the way it's implemented in a narrative sense made the movie blow past expectations. There have been other videos breaking down just about every aspect that, summed together, makes Into the Spider-Verse an amazing movie. From the aforementioned animation, the score, and of course, the writing. Miles Morales is a fascinating protagonist whose character arc flows with the different themes of choice and reaching your potential. But in this video, I wanted to zoom in on the mentor character of the story, Peter B. Parker. Normally, someone in his role is a utility in a narrative, a tool for the protagonist to grow and change. The mentors help dispel the lie the main character believes and brings them closer to the truth. The screenplay writers and directors, Phil Lord and Rodney Rothman, gives us something different in the way of an older, experienced Spider-Man. My reasoning for focusing on Peter B. Parker is to highlight how his arc changes in engaging and relatable ways, and to highlight how this detail-rich movie, with all its moving parts, still retains important themes as well as challenge our preconceived notions on the Spider-Man character and his mythos. But before that, let's take a quick trip back in time and see why this comic book character has the staying power he does, and why a schlubby Spider-Man is one of the most refreshing takes we've ever seen. Much of Spider-Man's success comes from the fact that, early on, he was presented as a teenager with real problems like financial and romantic. The demographic he was presented to could totally relate to this. Nerdy teenager Peter Parker was an eruption of relatability as he lacked the emotional maturity readers had been used to seeing in heroes like Superman. He also lacked the boundless fortune to finance his crusade of justice like Batman. He had all the handicaps that regular mortals have, and he still wanted to do the right thing. This core idea of relatability is what made him so appealing despite that. The fact that he still faced mundane, everyday problems while also facing a rogues gallery of fearsome enemies really made it easy to root for him. As time passed, however, something stuck out as one would continue reading. Spider-Man never seemed to grow up. What felt like a lifetime ago, I was at DFW Con 2019, where Chuck Wendig delivered the keynote speech. And I looked it up on Twitter. 2019 was literally like a little over a year ago, and it really does feel like another lifetime. That's gonna come up later on in this video for sure. In his speech, he mentioned that many of us are drawn to stories because they're all about change. Changing the circumstances characters live in, changing to become the best version of themselves, or sometimes breaking down and becoming their worst selves. It's why YA, or young adult fiction, authors and writers have enjoyed great success. Their focus on adolescence, the ultimate season to change in a person's life, is what draws readers in. Everything is more dramatic, everything is a life and death struggle. Romance is intense, friendships are intense, the conflicts are elevated because the characters are just barely grasping the nuance underneath the surface of any given plot or arc. And this is why I think many of the bigwigs at Marvel were so reluctant to age Spider-Man up. There's a long-standing belief that with age comes maturity, and with maturity comes a loss of the dramatic magic. The most blatant attempt to keep Spider-Man a perpetual bachelor and someone trying to figure out his life came in Spider-Man One More Day in 2007. Peter Parker's marriage to MJ was stripped away through a deal made with Mephisto, Marvel's equivalent to Satan, all to keep Aunt May alive. You heard that correct. They really wanted to keep him at that nebulous age of changing and searching for himself by making a deal with the devil. As a culture overall, we're slowly shifting away from the focus on teenage adolescence and starting to look at the second adolescence emerging from our more connected society. It's an adolescence that comes from attempting to get our lives together and larger systems at play making it difficult to do so. Many of us find that we need to reinvent ourselves in the face of an ever-changing world, and boy has it been changing. Spider-Man on the PS4 gave us a glimpse at a more mature Peter Parker. He still has the financial and romantic woes as always, but he has more tread on the spider tires while maintaining nebulous youth. That's not to say there haven't been iterations that explored an older Peter Parker before, although a few of those can be a bit controversial when taken out of context. And yes, I'm talking about spider sperm. No other way around it. But what we got in 2018 was a wholly different Peter Parker. In his introduction scene, Peter B. Parker has been Spider-Man for 22 years. Keeping in line with what we know about the character, he's often depicted as starting his superhero career at a mere 15 to 16 years old. One would wager he's roughly about 27 to maybe 35 years old. That means the majority of his life has been spent balancing a dual identity. And in the next few scenes, we are shown how that tricky balance has affected his life. His marriage to MJ deteriorated, his Aunt May has passed, he broke his back, he wound up in financial trouble trying to operate a restaurant franchise under a name he can't really copyright unless he risks uncovering his real identity. With about half of his life dedicated to being Spider-Man, it's safe to say that being in danger is a constant state of being for him. We get evidence later on that he's perfectly adept at being in high-stakes situations and remaining unfazed. And with the need to keep his identity a secret, that dual identity can't have been easy in his relationships. As the montage continues, we see him cope with bad situations as he always does, through sarcasm and double meaning.
But I handled it like a champion.
While saying he takes it like a champ, we see that it's not the case. We wrap it up with B. Parker dropping into the movie's universe after the death of Peter Parker Prime, or what I'll call P-Cube. When he lands in Miles' New York, we get the first threads of where his character is going. The editing and cuts do a really great job nailing the point home of,
I was kind of perfect.
Miles takes his unconscious body out of the cemetery in a frenetic scene, and the movie really flexes his animation and comedic blocking. When B. Parker wakes up, we get a line that will come into effect much later.
It's a number one, kid. Don't watch the mouth. Watch the hands.
A down on his luck Spider-Man is already unique enough, but the following scene was personally shocking as it challenges to what Spider-Man actually is, in my opinion, at least to me. When Miles tries to convince B. Parker to help and train him, we get the first departure from the standard we're used to seeing. As Miles fills him in on the promise he made to P-Cubed, B. Parker says he just wants to go home to his life. Like, just that flippant, denial to do so. I remember this waving of the deaths of millions, if not billions, being so shocking to me when I first saw it. It felt so out of the familiar with Spider-Man. But, having been Spider-Man for 22 years, he goes back to his familiar with high stakes. So used to these high stakes, even the fact that he's in a whole different universe isn't enough to sway him. But as he's leaving, this different, out-of-character Spider-Man is swayed by Miles pressing on the very thing that connects every Spider-Person in the multiverse, and that is the weight of responsibility. It's the gravity that keeps them all anchored, even as space itself becomes flimsy, flaky, and wafer-like.
Look, I'm not looking for a side gig as a Spider-Man coach. I got a lot going on in my dimension, like a lot.
With great power comes
Don't
great...
you dare finish that sentence. Don't do it. I'm sick of it.
When they eat together, he hesitantly gives practical advice.
You got any Spider-Man tips you can tell me now?
Yeah, I got plenty. Disinfect the mask. You're gonna want to use baby powder in the soup, heavy on the joints. You don't want any chafing, right?
Anything else?
Nope, that was everything.
It's all he's willing to offer, as he's never gotten the same kind of guidance, so he's not used to that kind of relationship. He's still preoccupied with his own immediate wants of getting back to the life he's familiar with. When the movie transitions to him and Miles going to Alchemex, even with the knowledge of universes converging and the fact that he's glitching, so used to the stakes of life and death, he approaches the situation with a methodical, objective, and by-the-numbers approach, complete with comic panels and easy-flowing dialogue.
Step 3, I re-examine my personal biases.
Why did I get stuck with a janky old broke hobo Spider-Man? That's new.
During the break-in, he calls out the tropes he and we are used to.
This is pretty standard Spider-Man stakes, you get used to it. Watch this. He's gonna say, you've got 24 hours.
You've got 24 hours.
After getting into the office and caught by the professor, Olivia, we're treated to an important piece of exposition.
Wow, just complete cellular decay. You stay in this dimension too long, your body's gonna disintegrate. And I, for one, can't wait to watch.
The reveal that Liv, or Olivia Octavius, is the universe's version of Doc Ock is a fun one and sets the groundwork for other villain variations in any possible sequels, which you know, it's a superhero movie and it did really well, we're gonna get a sequel. I mean, it's already been confirmed.
Hands up! Okay, now we do a switchy.
What?
Get back here! Where do you think you're going? He took a bagel!
To reinforce this idea that he's used to life and death, we look at the difference between how he handles the situation versus Miles. Miles, being a new Spider-Man, is not used to being chased by armed scientists, while B. Parker still gives them pointers as they're being pursued.
Aim with your hips! Look where you want it to hit! Square your shoulders! Don't forget to follow through! Don't shoot off your back foot!
There's too many things!
Then stop listening to me!
That's the best idea you've had all day.
Miles takes a leap of faith and finds himself leveling up just a little bit, inspiring hope in B. Parker. We're introduced to Spider-Woman, or Gwen Stacy's real identity, and we get her origin of how she ended up in Miles' universe. She touches on the fact that she lost her Peter Parker, so one has to imagine how weird it is to be in another universe where another one died, and the one in front of her is a schlubby 30-year-old. There's actually a really fascinating cut when Miles and Gwen are speaking to one another, and I can really think of two explanations as to why we got a close-up on B. Parker's face. And the first is practical, because we're given hints as to where they're going to go next. It's just a smooth transitioning shot to the next scene. But the next possible reason is a little bit more subjective and really based on how you view the movie, and this is how I viewed it. He could be wearing that expression because he's remembering his first interaction with MJ. He's remembering when he was newer to superheroics and had a bright future ahead of him. This was before he knew how everything would turn out. He probably remembers the butterflies in his own stomach as he navigated through his blossoming feelings for MJ. He has a perspective of someone older, seeing kids start their own path. The next few scenes are probably the most telling about B. Parker's current state of being. Going to fix the goober, B. Parker rings on the doorbell and sees Aunt May for the first time since burying her in his/our universe. What's interesting is how she addresses him and how he replies,
Hey, Aunt May. You look tired, Peter. Well, I am tired.
Miles offers his condolences and Aunt May indicates that she might know of what's going on more than they think she does.
And what dimension are you from?
Brooklyn?
I have to give credit to Straw Hat Goofy on TikTok for inspiring the idea of this video with his quick take on Peter B. Parker.
Okay, last Into the Spider-Verse detail, I promise. It has to do with Peter, and it's pretty dark. Anyone notice how Peter gets more suicidal as the movie goes on?
Particularly the attention to detail paid on his face as he goes down the elevator. It's a 1-2 punch of jealousy and ultimately regret. He's literally surrounded by mementos of a better, more perfect Spider-Man.
Is yours anything like this?
Mine was like this, but take away the Jeep plane. Imagine it way smaller. Imagine a futon. I feel sad for this guy.
P-Cube left behind Aunt May and MJ while B. Parker lost them both. Even his own body won't allow him to stay in this better version of his life. If the notion of going into a new universe hasn't broken him yet, it's all coming to the forefront now. All that's left for him is the mission to set the world right and return to the purgatory he made for himself. Before diving off the deep end, we cut to Miles. He riffs on B. Parker about Spider-Man not having a cape.
Hey, Peter. I think this is a cape.
While everything had fallen apart in his/our universe, he still has one last shot at doing something great, passing on his knowledge to Miles. While not overly stated, this small turn of his head indicates a shift of thinking for him, especially when he focuses on Miles and they share a moment together.
Kingpin knows we're coming. We're going to be outnumbered.
Don't be so sure.
With more Spider People, we start the next act as the remaining three, Peter, Penny, and Spider-Ham, introduce themselves to Miles, Gwen, and B. Parker. After establishing where the story is going to go, the group discusses the stakes.
Now, we're just trying to find a way home.
The only way home is back through that collider gizmo. The only trouble is...
one of us has to stay behind and destroy it.
I'll do it.
As expected, they all volunteer to make the big play, but Miles, being the protagonist, tells them that he'll do it and will send them home. Being so new to the business, the Spider People have their doubts as to whether he's up to snuff.
Who are you again?
B. Parker tries to sell them on the idea, but to no avail.
When you think you can't
on, Miles. Come on, Miles.
Guys, cool it.
Miles leaves the team behind. Miles tries to find solace with his uncle, but finds that Aaron and the Prowler are the same person. He goes back to Aunt May's, unintentionally leading the villains to ramp up a fight between them and the Spider People. While they manage to repel the villainous forces, Miles loses his uncle in an emotional scene where Aaron admits to his mistakes and tells him that he has to be better, to keep going.
No, Ma.
Miles is at a loss and is spiraling with emotions buzzing in him.
You're the best of all of us, Ma. You're on your way. Just keep going. Just keep going.
The Spider People arrive to say goodbye as he's too green for the task.
You're taking my place? If you stay here, you'll die.
I'm doing what needs to be done. I just wanted you to hear it from me.
B. Parker reveals that he's staying behind, effectively sealing his fate.
That's not fair. You gotta tell them I can do this.
It wasn't their decision.
After seeing how much he lacked, B. Parker must be feeling a sense of control in taking his life and destiny into his own hands. Because B. Parker has never had a mentor, because his major moral compass left him with responsibility after he died, he passes on the one bit of knowledge that served him and the other Spider People in their lives.
I'm sorry.
When will I know I'm ready?
You won't. It's a leap of faith. That's all it is, Miles. A leap of faith.
We ramp up the third act as the Spider crew infiltrates Kingpin's ceremony. We also see the start of the third act of B. Parker's own arc.
Can't be that easy. It's that easy.
While the next scene is played for laughs, to me there is a darker implication when he speaks to MJ. Knowing the consequences of having made his decision to stay behind, he tries to cobble a sort of goodbye to MJ.
I'm sorry, I'll be right back. I'm really sorry. I wasn't there for you when you needed me. I didn't even try.
That's fine.
I know I could do better if I just had another chance to give you the bread that you deserve.
Gwen tries to get him back into the game, and one has to wonder if she has any words for him since he is a Peter Parker.
Peter, come here. Trust me, I've been there. You gotta move on.
They get to the Collider, and Gwen tells B. Parker that he doesn't have to stay.
I can do it.
It's okay. I've made up my mind.
They're flanked by the villains, as expected of the third act, but Miles arrives and lends him a hand.
Miles?
Oh, Miles! You're doing it on command!
It's about time, right?
I love you. I'm so proud of you. Come on, kids.
In this scene, a possible future flashes before him, but having made up his mind and saying his wonky goodbye to MJ, he realizes that all he has to do is send everyone home and stay behind. In a twist and reflection to one of the first times they interacted, Miles, the student, surpasses the mentor.
I'll go. I'm the one with the goop. Oh, you gotta be kidding me.
Don't wash the mouth. Wash the hands.
The group begins to part ways with one another, but here B. Parker is hesitant as his plan to lay down his life has been interrupted by his pupil. His want to go home to his place of stagnation is now in conflict with what he really needed, moving on after the mistakes that led him to where he is. Luckily for him, the immediate threat interrupts them and he reverts to what he's familiar with, to what he's been conditioned to since losing Uncle Ben as a teenager and gaining his powers.
Push the green button! Do not wait for me!
With great power comes the time to take ultimate responsibility. With the evidence being his own introduction scene, he says one thing but means another.
I can't let Spider-Man die!
Neither can I.
When he lays out understandable reasons why he should make the final play, Miles is catching on to his reluctance to go back, the seed sprouting from an earlier question.
What about MJ?
Not everything works out.
Miles counters him on every one of those points both verbally and physically. The same technique that subdued Miles is used on B. Parker. Miles has gained a resolve to send B. Parker home and save the multiverse. Stripped of the artifice of responsibility, B. Parker is now confronted with the return to a world he isn't sure he can exist in anymore. He has seen and felt too many changes that make going home feel like a death of sorts. Since he gained his powers and lost Uncle Ben, he has used his abilities to uphold the responsibility he believes falls on him. During that time, he's had to balance two different lives, keeping them as separate as he can in order to maintain richness in both. Those of us pursuing anything great while keeping food on the table know the absolute struggle of keeping balance, and we don't even have supervillains to contend with. One of the core ideas and curses that sticks with him is that Spider-Man cannot advance. He has to struggle in order to be the relatable, friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. He's a hero of the people because he's one of us. He's not allowed to find financial stability, grow stable relationships, or even retire and hand the mantle over to a student. The real-world reason why he can't move on is because he's too popular of a character to tweak the formula. When B. Parker tries to capitalize on his brand recognition into a franchise, it doesn't work out. When he tries to maintain the life of superheroics, he breaks his back. When he tries to have stability, he loses Aunt May and MJ. Though never stated, it's very possible that Aunt May could have been killed by an enemy than any natural causes taking her. This has been touched on in the comics before. With MJ, why would he want to bring children into a world where his enemies could figure out his and his family's identity? And after losing everything, one of his lives rotted away, that of Peter Parker. All he has left when we first meet him in the movie is the persona of Spider-Man. Even when he's in the shower or wallowing in despair, he's still in his costume. Aunt May and MJ were the last tethers to that normal life. And while he is aware of the hell he created for himself, he still wants to go back so badly in the beginning that he's willing to risk the lives of millions, if not billions, of people in the other universes to do so. But despite the strict adherence to the status quo, there's another unbreakable part of him that can't be torn from his character. And that's his need to do the right thing. B. Parker has gone through enough to give up on the world and worlds around him. But the promise he made to his uncle decades ago,
great power,
knowing that only he has the power to do anything about it, he finally decides to go on his journey with Miles and coach him as best as he can. We don't see a lot of this, but he leaves Miles with a bit of advice that will stick with him for the rest of his life. All it takes is a leap of faith. The other Spider people have this instinct, but B. Parker has extra drive to stick to his guns due to him having done it longer and with nothing else to lose. He sees MJ one more time. The balance of keeping two lives nourished allotted no time to learn how to communicate his own feelings and needs, but he still cobbles together final words to her in his own way. He sees a ray of hope when they're being flanked as Miles ascends, getting closer to his potential. There's a flash of possibility as he asks himself if he wants kids. But the demanding life of Spider-Man does what it always does, rears its head at inopportune moments. Miles exceeds expectations and B. Parker is the last Spider person left. He takes off his mask and is confronted with the duality of wants and needs clashing once more. He scrambles, explaining that he's trying to protect Miles, the unseasoned Spider-Man, from dying at the hands of the Kingpin. Miles lost his uncle Aaron, but his relationship's post-powers are just beginning to blossom. With Gwen, ironically, a capable person in the context of superheroics becoming a friend, he's alleviated from that fear of protecting her, at least. The idea probably hasn't formed in his head yet as he's just now growing into his abilities. He still has much to lose. B. Parker does not. Not yet. The thing that frightens B. Parker is continuing to live in stagnation after seeing the beauty of potential in other worlds. It took a cosmic abnormality to tear him from his own pit of depression, and now he's frightened to go back. All that progress, that breaking of the status quo set upon writers, editors, and fan expectations for decades might go back to where it has always been. He confides in Miles that he doesn't know what will happen afterwards.
How do I know I'm not gonna mess it up again?
The meta horror of being unable to change your fate despite your greatest efforts is visible in B. Parker.
You won't.
I hate to leap the faith.
Until he lets go. B. Parker, unsure of how the fight between Miles and the Kingpin will pan out, unsure of what his return will entail, this different Spider-Man decides to take a leap of faith and face an uncertain future. This Spider-Man, this flawed and schlubby hero, has advanced. Due to it being a superhero movie, of course Miles wins the day, he saves the multiverse and puts the Kingpin behind bars. And due to the nature of these kinds of stories, it's more than likely it won't be the last time we see him. In the end, we get a few shots of the Spider People and their respective universes continuing their lives. When we catch up to B. Parker, he's seen at MJ's front door with a bouquet of flowers. What I like best about this is while it has a tinge of hopefulness, there's shock on MJ's face rather than one of overwhelming joy. B. Parker's face is one of acceptance. While unsure of how the conversation will pan out, he has still taken a step forward. And we don't see the resolution of the implied conversation, because it doesn't matter. Whether they get back together or don't, this Peter Parker broke through his stagnation and the status quo. An unknown future is now ahead of him. What that means for Spider-Man, we have no clue. I think one of the most understated and brilliant things about Peter B. Parker is the fact that his universe is our universe. It's harsh and blunt. With me releasing this video at the end of the year, I don't have to belabor the adage of 2020 being the worst. I was there, you were there, we get it. It wasn't just the looming threat of World War to start us off, or the fires ravaging the Australian continent, or the ugly reminder that injustice still exists, or the underlying theme of quarantine and isolation both infecting large swaths of the population. All combined, and despite it all, it was a year of great change for the world. On a quieter, personal level for all of us, relationships deteriorated as the dynamics shifted. Our health took a hit in either good or bad ways, depending on the familiar habits we cling to as the world changes. The financial stability for working people has been rocked at its foundation, and this came from being in quarantine and forming a routine of stillness. And as a consequence of that, many of us were forced to look at our own personal stagnations and looking at the patterns we cling to so desperately, especially during the winds of change. The familiar doesn't necessarily have to be comfortable either. That's the scary part. It's the programming we revert to, especially when things get challenging, that keeps us where we are. Ironically, this new mode of the status quo allowed for great change for those seeking it. Humans have this incredible ability to adapt to new situations and settings, and many of us are ending the year in places we never could have imagined. With the status quo being one of Spider-Man's greatest crutches, I find B. Parker fascinating because he represents everything that goes against what's familiar and expected. The fact that he's presented in an unflattering manner makes him all the more relatable. Those of us scrounging for any semblance of stability as we work to balance our lives can see ourselves in B. Parker's situation. He also echoes his Miles' last lines about, "You can wear the mask."
You could wear the mask.
We even see him play out the low point that some of us reach, unfortunately. When everything we worked so hard for and had been planning gets snatched away by circumstances out of our control, like war, fires, sickness, injustice, when the people we relied on aren't able to be reliable anymore as they go into their own seasons of change, we're left alone. We put on the costume and mask, but sometimes it's not enough. Our minds rattle with what we can do to alleviate that, and frighteningly, our thoughts loom on the option of taking ourselves out of the equation entirely. We'll find justifications why it's the best choice. We have our responsibilities, but at times find ourselves with no power. We find ourselves wanting to do the right thing, but find no one to confide in, no one to take that load from us. The option of opting out becomes that much more alluring. But we forget one thing. All of us do. We are so much more powerful than we give ourselves credit for. We're always knocked down, and amazingly, a lot of us get right back up. And if we stick to it for just a bit longer, we're guaranteed to find others who know exactly how it feels. Ultimately, changing your life requires you to do the things you're terrified to do. That might mean reshaping what's important and what advancements you'll need to take to make it happen. And sometimes, it's realizing your fear of isolation and abandonment and still pushing through. Opening yourself up to new people and experiences. It's about putting yourselves out there, unsure of what tomorrow will bring. And without anyone to guide us, or any knowledge to rely on, especially in these changing times, sometimes it takes a leap of faith. If you've made it this far into the video, you have my sincerest and deepest gratitude. This video took a lot longer than I expected. I can't believe I actually thought I'd be able to publish this before the year ended. But if you could be so kind as to do the usual YouTube things, you know, subscribe, share, comment, you know, just share it with other people, see if they might be interested. I'd like to keep doing these types of videos in the future for sure, because while it took a lot of work, I had a lot of fun doing it. And with that all said, I've also left links below, you know, for any resources for those who need it, because I know I kind of touched on a heavy topic there. Just know that you're not alone, you're valued, you're loved, and you have so much more to give to the world than you realize. But other than that, I really hope you guys are coming into the new year with a fresh attitude and mindset. And with that said, I'll see you next time.